I gave my parents everything. My time, my love, my loyalty. But the moment my golden boy brother pointed fingers, they turned on me like I was nothing, cut me off, blocked my number, said I was jealous of his success. But what they didn't know was that their perfect son was quietly stealing everything from them right under their roof. And by the time they found out, it was already too late. If you've ever been the forgotten child or blamed for something you didn't do, this story will hit close to home. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters here. Charlotte Reynolds had always been the quiet one in her family. At 29, she was a devoted nurse living in Seattle, spending long hours caring for patients with gentle patience and unwavering dedication. She wasn't flashy, and she never craved the spotlight. Instead, Charlotte found fulfillment in simple things: a warm cup of coffee in the morning, the smile of a grateful patient, and the steady comfort of her small apartment overlooking the rainy streets of her city. But at home, Charlotte's life was far from peaceful. Growing up, she had always felt like the forgotten child in the Reynolds household. Her parents, Diane and Mark Reynolds, were proud and traditional, deeply invested in their two children. Yet their affection clearly favored her younger brother, Ryan. Ryan was the golden boy, confident, charismatic, and seemingly destined for success. From a young age, he dazzled their parents with his charm and bold ideas. Whether it was school projects, sports, or business ventures, Ryan seemed to effortlessly shine. Diane often boasted about him to friends and family, while Mark never missed a chance to compare Charlotte unfavorably to her brother. "Why can't you be more like Ryan?" was a phrase Charlotte heard far too often. Her achievements, good grades, a stable job, and a steady, kind heart were overshadowed by Ryan's flashy lifestyle and booming self-confidence. Despite this, Charlotte never let resentment take root. She told herself that love was unconditional, that family was family, and that loyalty meant standing by her parents no matter what. After all, she knew Ryan's path was far from perfect. She had seen glimpses of his arrogance and recklessness, but she convinced herself it wasn't her place to expose him. For years, Charlotte accepted the role her parents had carved for her: the responsible daughter who quietly held the family together while her brother chased his dreams and sometimes his schemes. Ryan's latest venture was no different. He'd launched a startup promising to revolutionize the tech industry. His stories were always filled with grand plans and big investments, painting a picture of inevitable success. Diane and Mark were thrilled quickly, pouring their savings and trust into Ryan's venture, believing their son was on the brink of greatness. Charlotte, however, remained skeptical. She worried about the risks, but never voiced her concerns after all. She was the outsider in the family's eyes, the daughter who wasn't expected to understand business or ambition. Seattle's skyline gleamed beyond her window as Charlotte juggled exhausting shifts at the hospital and quiet evenings at home, always aware of the growing tension in the Reynolds household. Her parents' conversations were increasingly dominated by Ryan's plans and challenges. Meanwhile, she remained the invisible daughter, the one to call when help was needed, but not the one to celebrate. It was a painful existence, but Charlotte bore it silently, holding on to hope that one day her family would see her worth beyond her brother's shadow. Little did she know, the coming storm would shatter everything she thought she knew about loyalty, trust, and family. Charlotte Reynolds had always known her family favored her younger brother Ryan, but she never imagined how deep the divide would run until the day everything fell apart. It started with a phone call late one evening. Ryan's voice was tight, strained with desperation. His tech startup, which had once seemed destined for greatness, was on the verge of collapse. Investors were pulling out, debts mounting, and Ryan's pride had taken a hard hit. "Charlotte," he pleaded, "I need your help. Just this once. I promise I'll pay you back." Charlotte hesitated. She was a nurse, working long hours, saving every penny for her future, for emergencies, not for risky business deals. Her savings weren't just money. They were her security, her peace of mind. "I can't," she said firmly. "I'm sorry, Ryan. I just can't take that risk," he snapped. "You don't get it. If you don't help me, everything will fall apart. The company, our reputation, everything. Mom and Dad are counting on me." Charlotte's heart ached. She wanted to help. She truly did, but she couldn't throw away her future for a gamble. She suggested he seek a loan or find other investors, but Ryan refused to listen. The next morning, the family dynamic shifted overnight. Ryan spun a story to their parents that Charlotte had refused to help the family in a time of crisis, that she was jealous and petty. Her parents, Diane and Mark Reynolds, were quick to believe their son. Their calls to Charlotte turned cold, accusatory. "How could you abandon your own brother?" Diane's voice trembled with hurt and disappointment. "Ryan needs us." "Why can't you understand that?" Mark added sternly. Charlotte tried to explain her side, the risks, her concerns about Ryan's recklessness, her unwillingness to bankroll a doomed venture, but her words were dismissed as excuses. The message was clear. Charlotte was the problem. Days turned into weeks, and the cold shoulder from her parents only deepened. Family dinners she was once invited to became distant memories. Holiday gatherings passed without a word or invitation. Phone calls went unanswered, texts ignored. Charlotte felt erased from the family narrative. It was a loneliness that gnawed at her soul. Not just the absence of family, but the sense of betrayal, that those she loved most could turn their backs so easily. Yet even in isolation, Charlotte couldn't shake the gnawing suspicion that something was terribly wrong with Ryan's story. Whispers from friends, hushed conversations overheard in the hospital break room, and social media posts hinted at trouble. Rumors of unpaid bills, angry creditors, and legal threats shadowed Ryan's once bright reputation. Unable to stand by, silently, Charlotte began to quietly investigate. She reached out to acquaintances in banking and legal circles, piecing together bits of information. Her worst fears were confirmed. Ryan had not only been reckless, he had been deceitful. Documents were forged, debts hidden, and the ultimate betrayal, Ryan had forged their parents' signatures to secure a massive loan using their family home as collateral. The realization was devastating. The family home, the place that was supposed to be a sanctuary, was now at risk of being lost because of Ryan's lies. When Charlotte confronted Ryan, she hoped for a moment of remorse, some acknowledgement of his wrongdoing. Instead, he was cold, dismissive, and warned her to stay out of his affairs. "Don't interfere, Charlotte. You're out of your league." Her pleas to her parents fell on deaf ears. Their love for Ryan, their blind faith, made them refuse to believe he could betray them so completely. Charlotte's world was unraveling. The sister who had given so much was now cast aside as a villain. The brother she had once admired was a thief, hiding behind a mask of charm and lies. She was alone in a family torn apart by greed, trust broken by betrayal. But Charlotte's story was far from over. Charlotte felt like the ground had shifted beneath her feet, leaving her unsteady and alone. The weight of betrayal crushed her, not just from Ryan, but from the parents who had once been her safe haven. She couldn't believe that the people she loved most had blindly sided with her brother, ignoring her warnings, dismissing her pleas, and ultimately cutting her out of their lives. The silence from Diane and Mark was louder than any argument. It screamed rejection, and it echoed through every empty room of her heart. As she sifted through the evidence of Ryan's deception, the reality became unbearably clear. The family she'd fought to protect was now in grave danger. The forged documents, the hidden loans, the mounting legal threats, it was all real. Their home, the place where she grew up, was at risk of being seized, lost forever, because of her brother's greed. Charlotte spent sleepless nights scrolling through bank statements, emails, and public records, her heart pounding with every damning detail she uncovered. The more she learned, the more isolated she felt. She couldn't turn to her parents. They refused to believe the truth. She couldn't trust Ryan, who had warned her to stay silent or face consequences. The pressure mounted, and with it the pain. Charlotte's job at the hospital became both a refuge and a torment. She cared for others with compassion, but inside, she was crumbling. Every smile she forced, every comforting word she gave felt like a lie. One evening, after a grueling 12-hour shift, Charlotte sat alone in her apartment, the rain tapping softly against the window. Her phone buzzed an unknown number. Her heart skipped. It was a call from a family friend, someone who had quietly observed the situation but hadn't dared speak up. "Charlotte," the voice said hesitantly, "there are things your parents don't know. Ryan's been hiding more than you think. I'm worried for them." Hope flickered. For the first time in weeks, Charlotte felt she wasn't entirely alone. Determined to save her family from ruin, Charlotte began piecing together a plan. She contacted a trusted lawyer who specialized in fraud cases. She gathered every scrap of evidence: bank records, forged contracts, witness statements. But the emotional toll was staggering. Charlotte had to keep this fight secret from her parents, who still believed in Ryan's innocence. She was forced to live a double life, cheerful nurse by day, relentless investigator by night. The loneliness was suffocating. Friends noticed her withdrawal, but Charlotte brushed off their concerns. How could she explain the betrayal and heartbreak without sounding like the villain her family had made her out to be? Then came the day when Ryan's deception finally exploded into the open. The bank froze the family's assets pending investigation. The Reynolds home was at risk of foreclosure. Legal papers piled up on their kitchen table, a cruel reminder of Ryan's recklessness. Diane and Mark were devastated, their world collapsing around them. Yet in their pain, they still couldn't accept the full truth. They blamed Ryan's failure on bad luck and external enemies, refusing to see the betrayal that had festered within their own family. Charlotte watched the family she loved fall apart piece by piece. But through the pain, a quiet fire ignited within her, a resolve not to let her brother's lies destroy everything. She realized that saving her family meant standing up, even if it meant fighting against those she cared about most. Because sometimes love means having the courage to do what's right, even when it hurts. Charlotte stood on the front steps of her parents' house, a folder of documents clutched tightly in her hand. Her palms were sweating, heart pounding. The home she had grown up in now felt like foreign territory, haunted by memories of warmth that had long since turned cold. She had called ahead. Her mother's voice had been clipped, but not hostile. If this is about your brother again, Charlotte, we don't want any more drama, Diane had warned. Charlotte almost turned back. Almost. But this wasn't just about drama anymore. It was about truth and justice and stopping the bleeding before it swallowed them all whole. Inside the living room looked the same worn leather couch, same photo wall with smiling pictures of Ryan at every milestone. Charlotte noticed there were hardly any pictures of herself anymore. She swallowed hard. Mark sat stiffly in his recliner, eyes avoiding hers. Diane crossed her arms, standing behind him. They were tense, defensive. So Diane said sharply, "What is it this time?" Charlotte handed them the folder. "You need to see this. Please, I'm begging you to read it." Reluctantly, Diane opened the folder. Her eyes moved across the papers. Bank statements, notarized affidavits, copies of forged documents showing Ryan's use of their home as collateral for hundreds of thousands in loans. As the evidence piled up, Diane's expression cracked. Mark leaned in, his jaw tightening. What? What is this?" he muttered. "It's everything I've been trying to tell you," Charlotte said softly. "Ryan lied to all of us. He forged your signatures, drained accounts, and disappeared. And you need to act now, or you'll lose everything." There was a long, suffocating silence, the kind that makes your stomach ache because you don't know what's going to happen next. "I don't believe this," Diane whispered. "He wouldn't do this to us." Charlotte stepped closer. "I didn't want to believe it either. But it's the truth. And the longer you stay in denial, the worse it's going to get." Mark's face flushed with a mixture of shame and rage. He pushed the folder away and stood abruptly. How could I have been so blind? But Diane wasn't ready to let go. No, there has to be an explanation. Maybe he was desperate. Maybe someone tricked him. "Mom," Charlotte cut in, voice trembling. "Ryan wasn't tricked. He is the trickster. He's been hiding money offshore in fake accounts. I found evidence with my lawyer. He didn't just get in over his head. He planned this. He used you." Tears spilled down Diane's face. "He's my son. And I'm your daughter," Charlotte cried, her voice breaking for the first time. "Why didn't that matter? Why was I always the one left out? Always the one doubted?" Diane looked shattered, but said nothing. Mark sank into the chair again, defeated. "So, what do we do?" Charlotte straightened, brushing away her own tears. "We fight, but we do it smart. I've already started the process. I hired a fraud attorney. If we act fast, we can freeze his remaining assets. We might be able to save the house, maybe even press criminal charges." Mark nodded slowly, but Diane's eyes remained clouded with grief and disbelief. As the days passed, things moved quickly and painfully. Charlotte spent hours in meetings with lawyers, banks, and law enforcement. She took time off from the hospital, drained by the emotional toll of the legal battle. She provided everything she'd uncovered: Ryan's false statements, the transfer trails to hidden accounts, and testimonies from people he had scammed. Her parents were pulled deeper into the legal chaos. Every knock at the door made them jump. Every phone call was a potential foreclosure notice. Charlotte tried to shield them, But there was only so much she could do. The hardest moment came 2 weeks later when federal agents finally issued a warrant for Ryan's arrest. He was found in a luxury condo in Miami, living under a false name, still draining money from what remained of his shell companies. He didn't resist arrest. In fact, he barely reacted when they brought him in, like it was inevitable, like he knew it would all come crashing down. Charlotte sat alone in her car that night, after hearing the news, staring at the dashboard, tears streaming down her face. It should have felt like victory, justice, but it didn't. It felt like grief. Grief for the brother she had once loved. Grief for the family that would never be the same. Diane called her later that evening. Her voice was small, broken. "You were right. I didn't want to see it, but you were right." Charlotte didn't say anything for a moment. "Then I never wanted to be right, Mom. I just wanted us to be okay." Diane sobbed on the other end. "Can you ever forgive me?" Charlotte closed her eyes. "I'm not ready, but I'm trying." In the weeks that followed, the case against Ryan made headlines in local news. Promising young entrepreneur, accused of defrauding family. One headline read, "Charlotte didn't read the articles. She didn't need to. She lived it." Eventually, her parents began to thaw. Mark, in his quiet way, started calling her once a week. Diane sent her flowers on a Tuesday, no note. It was a start, but Charlotte had changed. She had walked through fire. She had learned the cost of blind trust and the strength it took to stand alone. She would never be the same woman who once begged for her family's approval. And though the scars were still fresh, there was a strange kind of peace that settled in the aftermath, because the truth was out, because lies no longer ruled her world, and because Charlotte had chosen finally to believe in herself. Charlotte didn't want revenge in the way most people imagined it. She didn't want Ryan to suffer just for the sake of it. What she wanted, what she needed, was justice, accountability, the truth out in the open, undeniable and irreversible. And she wasn't going to wait around for it to happen. With her lawyer, a sharp and relentless woman named Eva Burke, Charlotte began laying out the legal trap that would ultimately take Ryan down. Step 1 was freezing his remaining accounts. Charlotte had already discovered 2 offshore funds tied to Ryan's shell corporations. With evidence in hand, Eva petitioned the court for emergency action. Within a week, Ryan's assets were locked inaccessible. No more shopping sprees in Miami. No more disappearing money. Step 2 was informing the financial institutions Ryan had defrauded. Once the banks saw the evidence of forged signatures and falsified loan documents, they had no choice but to back out of any attempts to claim her parents' property. That saved Diane and Mark's house barely. It was a small victory, but a deeply personal one. Step 3. The most difficult was testifying. Charlotte took the stand in the courtroom, her voice steady but firm. She told the story of the sweet-talking younger brother who had been coddled and protected for so long that he believed himself untouchable. She described the manipulation, the betrayal, and the heartache. Ryan, seated across from her in a crisp, jail-issued jumpsuit, looked bored. As if none of this mattered. As if he wasn't the one who had nearly destroyed his family's life. When it was Ryan's turn to speak, he tried to spin his narrative. "I was under pressure," he said. "The market collapsed. I never meant to hurt anyone. I thought I could fix it before it got out of hand, but the courtroom wasn't buying it. Not the jury, not the judge. and certainly not Charlotte. It was the final piece of evidence, the video testimony from a former business partner, that sealed his fate. The man, visibly shaken, described how Ryan had bragged about being able to fleece his parents without them even noticing. There was a collective gasp in the courtroom. Diane wept silently beside Mark, who kept his hand clenched into a white-knuckled fist. Ryan's fate was sealed. The judge called him what he was, a calculated, unrepentant con man who exploited the trust of his own family for personal gain. He was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison with no chance of early release. He would serve his time in a medium-security facility far from the flashy condos and high-rise offices he used to flaunt. And with that, the gavel came down. Charlotte didn't celebrate. She didn't smile. She simply exhaled slowly, like a pressure valve releasing after years of strain. But karma wasn't finished. Because as the story spread, the fallout for Ryan extended far beyond prison. His companies were blacklisted. His name was tarnished in every financial circle he'd once charmed. Former clients sued. Friends vanished. His so-called business empire crumbled to ashes. And Charlotte. She quietly became the hero of her own story. People reached out, former neighbors, hospital co-workers, even distant relatives, offering their support, their apologies, their admiration. She didn't need applause, but it felt good to know she wasn't invisible anymore. Diane and Mark, humbled and broken, began to rebuild their relationship with Charlotte brick by brick. It was awkward at first, painful, but real. They started asking about her work, her friends, her life. Diane showed up with homemade soup. On days Charlotte worked late shifts, Mark helped her fix a leaky pipe in her apartment without being asked. One evening, as they sat quietly watching old home movies, Diane turned to her daughter with tearful eyes. "I see you now, Charlotte. I see everything I was too blind to see before." Charlotte didn't respond right away. She just reached out and took her mother's hand. Forgiveness wasn't instant, but it had begun, and Ryan. From prison, he sent 2 letters. The first was angry and blaming, full of self-pity and half-hearted excuses. Charlotte didn't even open the second one, because by then she understood something important. Closure didn't come from hearing an apology. It came from knowing you did the right thing, even when no one stood with you, even when it meant standing alone. Charlotte went back to work full-time. She picked up night shifts again, but this time with renewed strength. Her patients didn't know the battles she'd fought. They just saw a nurse who smiled warmly, who cared deeply, who never gave up on them or on herself. On her 31st birthday, Diane baked her a cake for the first time in over a decade. They sat around the table, just the 3 of them. No grand speeches, no forced smiles, just quiet laughter and flickering candles. It wasn't perfect, but it was healing, and that was enough. Because Charlotte had learned the most powerful truth of all. Some betrayals break you, but some shape you into someone stronger than you ever imagined. The sun was setting behind Charlotte's apartment as she stood by the window sipping tea. For the first time in a long while, the silence felt peaceful, not heavy, not lonely, just still. Her phone buzzed, a simple message from her mother, "Dinner Sunday." Just the 3 of us. No special occasion. Just us. Charlotte smiled softly. It wasn't about grand gestures anymore. It was about showing up consistently, honestly. And this time, they were finally showing up for her. Ryan was still behind bars, and would be for years. She didn't hate him, not anymore, but she no longer felt responsible for saving him. He'd made his choices, and she had made hers. She had chosen truth over silence, justice over fear, herself over the illusion of family loyalty. And now she had peace. Not the kind that came from forgetting, but the kind that came from forgiving without reopening old wounds. The kind that let her walk forward, wiser, steadier. At work, Charlotte was promoted to senior nurse supervisor. Her colleagues described her as the calm in the storm, someone patients instinctively trusted. She carried scars, but also strength. And when people asked how she had managed to endure everything and still stand tall, she would smile and say, "Because I learned that love without respect isn't love, and family without truth isn't family." She paused, thinking of all she'd lost, then all she'd reclaimed. Then, with a quiet breath, she whispered the words that had carried her through the darkest nights. Some storms don't break you, they build you. And in that moment, Charlotte finally knew. She hadn't just survived. She had won.